Hi everyone, this is Simon from Horoma Studio. As I mentioned on the Instagram account and on the Facebook page, I'm taking the opportunity of this pandemic with the slower schedule lately, to have a look at some of the people who were looking forward to getting some feedback on their images. So hopefully I'll manage to keep on doing that in the coming weeks as well, in the coming month. And yeah. So let's get started with this image. There we go. So okay, all good. Sorry. So I'll create a new layer. So here we have this interesting image of sort of a museum in the desert. So I'll be a bit more freestyle this time because I'm not really organized. So I might go back and forth between several topics. So sorry about that. In terms of composition here, if we start from the very beginning, so sorry, this one, we can see that the composition is pretty straightforward, which is quite nice. I think there's an interesting composition because we have a nice foreground that's pretty legible with like nice details of like small rocks and like shrubs. Then we have the middle ground with the actual building. And then we have this sort of thing in the distance and a nice, almost cloudless sky. I'm actually wondering about this little dude here, but I think it's potentially interesting, although I have no idea of what type of cloud you should have in this type of desert, but this is quite interesting, I think, in terms of composition. When it comes to like the actual lighting, I think there's some stuff that are interesting. I think the contrast is sort of okay. Although, as we'll see, I think the main issue comes with the shadows that we have here. As you can see, the angle is quite low, which means that the sun should be quite low too. And the thing is, we don't have a type of sky that reflects this idea of having like either an early morning or a late in the day sun, which means that there's a sort of a discrepancy or like a mismatch between the shade of the sky here and the actual shade we should get and the sun orientation. So basically what it means is that if we were to have this sort of thing here, this should be slightly softer. And this should also get like a sort of a more orange or maybe even purple shade in the sky. So this is something I think is a bit problematic. If you had this sort of like blue sky, what you should have is, like shorter, let's do it like way, shorter shadows, and the contrast should be much starker. So this should be like, I won't say almost black, but because it shouldn't be black, but the contrast should be much like this sort of thing rather than this. So this is a little bit of an issue, I think, here. Also, like we have this sort of a hazy thing, which is quite nice because it sort of helps in blending the background here. But it also means that we should have like the shadows should be softer. So basically we have to choose here if we go with something that is like a really sunny blue sky and and stark contrast and sharp shadows, or like softer shadows with basically a different sky. So this is something that we would have to choose. In terms of overall contrast, I think there's something a little bit, I don't know, everything seems a bit desaturated. If you look at the saturation here, sorry, You can see that the most saturated part is the shadows, which makes sense because in daylight you have like really strong saturation in the shadows. But here you can see the sand is extremely desaturated, which could be okay, because depending on the type of, like, if it's some sort of like rocky, what's the word, rocky ground, it should be fine. But the thing is, the sky is extremely desaturated too, and I think this can be a bit of an issue, because the only way you could have it desaturated is if this sort of haze thing was actually like, I mean, thicker. But again, if we had this sort of thing thicker, this should be softer, etc. So basically it's like just choosing what kind of proper lighting we have. But here there's like a sort of mismatch between several, like the sun orientation, as I said, the color here, and the saturation, basically, overall saturation. So this is the thing I would sort of have a look at. When it comes to pure, when it comes to pure modeling, well, I'm not used to this scrubby zoom. Pure modeling, I think there's not much issue. It's like really simple geometry, but everything seems to be modeled properly. There was this topic regarding the floor. I think there's one thing that is a bit like is it high frequency, low frequency? The sand here looks a bit, interestingly, even though it's like blurred, it does look a bit low poly or whatever, or it's probably like displacement map, I don't know. Or not even low poly, but low resolution. So this is something I would sort of pay attention to. Whoops, I should do that. So I don't know, there's like, basically, I think it could be interesting to have maybe a stronger depth of field, but not even sure. So maybe it's more a matter of having like keeping the sort of depth of field we have here, but having something more slightly higher resolution for the floor here. Here's the same. I think it's fine, although it does look, it's purely visual, but I think the scale is slightly too small, so it's like a little bit too dense in terms of information compared with this. But also I think the main issue I have with this is, or actually like the thing that makes it complicated, is the fact that we don't know how big someone is. If this is like a house and this is only 2 level and someone is like this size, or if this is like a huge building and someone is just this size. Because as you can see here with the shrub here, it means we're really like, or a camera is at maybe, I don't know, 60 centimeter high or something, or let's say a meter, which means we're below eye level. So it means it's even more complicated to judge what's going to be the actual scale of this project. So I think it could be interesting to place maybe somewhere here, somewhere here, or wherever, I don't know. It could be fun because you would have like a nice cast shadow from the guy walking here. So if it makes sense to have someone on that side of the building, I think I would, so that you can understand better the overall scale. Beside that, I think I don't have much more to say. There's interesting, like, the texture work is fine. It looks maybe a little bit flat, but I think it's okay. I think it's okay. There's interesting reflection here, which is quite nice. The same happens here in the shadows, so it's overall it's a really good work. So yeah, I think that will be it for this one. when I was also thinking regarding the colors. I think, since, as I said, you can see here, sorry, that the sky might be a bit too desaturated. So maybe something would be interesting to actually try to get like a more saturated version with like this, because when you look at the like typical pictures in the desert, you always have like the highest saturation is, I think, always in the sky. So, and here, especially if everything is desaturated, it sort of loses a bit of interest in terms of like how you can keep the viewer looking at the image. If everything seems a little bit too low contrast and low saturation, then you lose a bit of interest. Whereas here, if you look at the mask, I'm adding just a little bit of variation and saturation in the building, but it is not even necessary. But it's more about like the overall sky here. So yeah, I think I'll stop here. But overall, the image is really nice. So it's just really about like slight adjustments in the lighting and the sort of consistency of like what the lighting is, what the hour is, and the actual shadow like we have, that is going to have like a tremendous impact in how to make it more interesting and more like realistic. So yeah, I'll stop here. Hopefully you've learned some interesting stuff, and I'll see you in the next Teardown. Thanks, guys.